All right, good morning. This morning we are joined by the namesake for Clayton Offroad, Clayton Walters. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. We've got a unique opportunity because we have Roy, who is our sales manager, his personal TJ in the shop this week while we are installing a Clayton 5-inch stretch kit. So thanks for hopping on this and joining the conversation about your product and about this kit specifically.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you inviting me to do this, and let's see if we can answer some of your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to dig into it, and some of these questions may seem kind of basic at first, but I'm sure you can shine some light onto it.
Mhm.
Obviously, this install is not for the faint of heart. We are stretching the wheelbase of a TJ 5 inches. And so why would any owner want to have this significant upgrade done? What does it add? What's the added value there?
It makes the vehicle a little bit more stable. Can use the analogy of like, say you got a square block on an incline, and that block can be very easy to tip and roll down the incline, right? But if you have a rectangular shape, I don't know if you're like the old wooden blocks, right? That longer block is gonna be harder to tip over or unweight. And then you're gonna have a little more stability going down the road also, just because of that longer wheelbase. A little, the shorter the wheelbase, the more touchy the steering is. So that's the big advantage of it. You're moving the wheelbase back. It also helps a little bit with your, the breakover angle in the back, which is pretty good to start with a TJ. But
So we talked about the advantages to having a longer wheelbase. There's also some geometry changes that happen with doing this 5-inch long arm stretch kit. You want to speak to that a little bit about maybe control arm angles and geometry?
because of the design of the Jeep, you're kind of confined to where you can actually put the control arm because of the tub and stuff. So, but basically we just, we try to create as much separation as we can between the lower arm and the upper arm. So it's probably not the perfect geometry, but it's better than stock. What goes on with the whole geometry thing when you go to like a long arm kit, right? It's not just a 5-inch stretch, but it also has long arms. You're doing the front and the rear. So if you think about it, right, you get your control arms. When that suspension cycles, the axle is actually going up and down in an arc, right? It's moving
Sure.
frontwards and backwards, right? So when you have a lift, if you put a bigger lift, like you go up to like 5 inches or whatever, like we only offer a 4-inch lift on short arms for the TJ, because the arms get an angle. So a lot of people think that, they lift their vehicle and they're like, oh, this thing is so harsh. And they oh, it's the springs, it's the shock. It's really the geometry, because when you hit a pothole or something like that, or even when you're off-roading, right, to get that suspension to compress, the axle actually has to move forward to come up, right? So that's what kind of creates the harshness. So when you have a longer control arm, that arc that the axle moves up and down in is so much bigger, so the forward and backwards movement is minimized. And then the other thing it does for you is, people say, oh, I went to, short arm kit, it's my steering stabilizer or something's wrong with my steering. It's like, no, it's axle steer, because the axles are actually moving in and out of parallel, right? As you go down the road, the crown of the road changes, the vehicle leans, your axles go like this. And that's what's actually causes the problem. So, we've just finished developing an our JL long arm kit, which really, you go from driving, wandering just to one finger on the wheel, right? So that's a big advantage right there. So that's about it. A little longer wheelbase helps, with stability when you're trying to climb steeper objects. It makes the vehicle go a little bit straighter down the road, and it also makes us a smoother, less harsh of a ride. And then the other big thing is, like if you it's just kind of funny. Like out west, Utah, wherever, all these dry rocks, right? People like crawling on, but on the East Coast here, it's always like, it's the bump it thing, right? You slimy, greasy muds, rock, roots. So, when you're trying to bump into something, if that axle's, your control arms are like this, when you hit it, right, it's just throwing you back. Whereas with the long arm, you just go up and over, right?
So something else that is noticeable when you're taking off your stock suspension and adding this Clayton 5-inch stretch kit, there's definitely noticeable differences continuing that vein of geometry. Like the front is now 3 link. There, you get rid of a control arm altogether, which may seem odd to people. And then in the back, you get rid of a track bar altogether. And so unless you really like understand or have had that geometry explained to you, you may think you're missing parts, but you're not. You're actually while we're removing suspension components, there's actually a lot to gain by triangulating the rear suspension and doing a 3-link setup in the front.
So we have, two different types of, the 3-link setup is a little bit more involved of an install because you have to put a bracket up on the frame and you have to put some kind of a bridge or a truss or a mounting point on your axle in the front. So a lot of people will buy the radius arm because it's just a little simpler install, right? But in the back, one of the big problems years ago was when you lifted your TJ up, the rear track bar was on such an angle, and then people would put a track bar bracket on, but then you had this huge lever, right, that's pulling the axle back and forth. So a lot of people would just break the rear track bar bracket off of the axle. It was a big problem. So the 4-link in the back eliminates the rear track bar, gives you a little more flex, and it's just able to float, and you don't have that problem with the track bar. And then the other thing it does is, by removing the track bar, you can cheat a little bit. You put a long arm kit on, you could probably get, without stretching, you can cheat back maybe an inch in the front, back an inch in the back, and forward a little bit, and give yourself a little bit longer wheelbase before the springs start to get too funky on you.
Another unique design element when looking at this specific kit, and frankly at most of your kits, is it's obvious that all of the control arms, or almost all the control arms, are made out of square tubing. And other than the OEM, I think you're the only company doing that. And so that's a cool, bold, creative move. Maybe you want to speak a little bit about the square control arms.
So like just if you take a 4-foot piece of my 2-inch square tubing, right, a 1/4-inch wall, and you support it at both ends, and say you put 200 pounds in the center of it, it's going to deflect less than a solid 2-inch round bar. Okay.
Wow.
So
that's incredible.
Yeah, you could go to like a chrome moly tubing and, change it. But in my experience, chrome moly, it's brittle, right? And then when you weld it, it's always more brittle. So I always had this theory of like, you know what? We have a lifetime warranty on our arms against bending and breaking. So, I would rather you bend that arm, right? And you get off the trail, you finish your wheeling, rather than if you had a chrome moly tube and, God forbid you hit that breaking point of it, it's going to snap, right? So now you're stuck with a broken arm, can't get off the trail unless you have a welder or whatever. So that's part of the theory behind that. The other thing too is it's so much lighter, right? So if you take that square tube 1/4-inch wall compared to a solid round, it's so much lighter, right? So
it's cool. I like how the control arms can really act as a skid, especially when you're running long arms. My dad had a 97 TJ that he wheeled hard. Oh my gosh, for probably, I don't know. I bet you the Clayton kit that was on it was 20 years old. So this might have been a very early kit that you guys did.
Yeah.
Maybe in like early 2000s or something like that. And like he just pounded this thing all the time at Roush Creek. If anybody's wheeled with us or with my dad, like he's heavy on the throttle. And I tell you, these control arms took a beating, slid over rocks, all sorts of stuff. They are just completely mauled
Right.
but they held up well.
That's the other advantage, right? You got that nice flat surface to slide on, right? Where you're gonna, if you have round tube, you're gonna kink it or bend it or
Yeah,
that just so that's another great advantage of
it works well.
it's a,
So
it's a little bit more difficult to work with, but it's done the trick for years and years, So
yeah, keep it up. So
yep.
while we're on the topic of control arms, the other end of the material is the bushings. And so you've got a lot of different options when it comes to, well, essentially two options when it comes to control arm bushings. Do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit in the different bushings that you offer in your control arms? And I think this translates your entire line from, TJ to JL. Anybody would have this conversation.
Yeah, so going back to the beginning, I used to use like a factory Clevite bushing, right?
Yeah, that's what my dad's Jeep had in it. Yep.
And a lot of people didn't realize that was like that was a mechanically bonded bushing, right? They didn't they would take the outer shell, the rubber, and the in sleeve, and it wasn't molded like that. They I don't know how they would do it, but they would squash everything together. So when it was released, it was stuck inside there. But the downfall of that Clevite bushing was a lot of people, like particularly out in the States where there's a lot of heat and stuff. I guess the rubber broke down a lot faster, caused problems. So, oh God, I don't know how many years. It's got to be 8 to 10 years ago. This company, they've changed their names, Red Ranger or whatever. They came to us with
White Line, I think, is their name now.
Yeah, that's their car line of stuff. But they, they called it a gyro joint, and but basically it was a urethane bushing with a sleeve in it that could pivot, right? So that let the suspension flex a little bit more, because like the old Clevite bushings, right, that you were twisting, right? So that's kind of limited the travel a little bit.
And that's the joint that you feature in your Overland Plus kit,
right,
and your Ride Right kits.
Right. Yep.
A maintenance-free dual durometer,
right,
high misalignment joint.
Right. And like years ago, before the JK came along, it was, people that had TJs and stuff like that. They were putting lift kits on to go wheeling, right? So they wanted articulation and and everybody. And nowadays it's just, people want maintenance free, smooth, quiet ride. They're not really so much concerned about rock crawling and stuff. So a lot of people are just into overlanding or camping or having a cool Jeep to drive around in. And
yeah,
so the market's really changed a lot with that. Of course, there is still, the hardcore people that, so that's why we have our premium kits, right? That has a joining joint on one end still with the gyro bushing. And
right. If you're wheeling it, right. The joints are going to live longer in that high misalignment environment,
right,
in the premium kit than they would in your Overland Plus or Ride Right kit.
Right. But I mean, we like, we very rarely, I mean, we have people calling us stuff. It's like you was talking about your dad, 20-year-old kits, like people like coming back with these old fabricated adjusters that I made 20 years ago and they want to rebuild it. And I'm just like, wow,
Yeah.
So, so it's been cool. It's been a crazy ride.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up what we want to talk about in this specific session, talking about this 5-inch TJ stretch kit. I'm excited to get this thing down on the ground on all 4 tires. It's going to be a really good looking project once it's all said and done. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking this time with me. I'm going to wrap up the recording here. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.